Nathan Walsh stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting a black tie that hadn't seen daylight in 3 years. The navy blazer hung loose on his shoulders, a remnant from a time when he still believed his family might accept him. Behind him, Alex Chen moved quietly around their Chicago apartment, folding clothes into an overnight bag with the practiced efficiency of someone who traveled for work but would rather stay home. The morning light filtering through their small kitchen window caught the rainbow keychain hanging from Nathan's keys on the counter. Without thinking, he walked over and slipped it into his jacket pocket, where it wouldn't catch anyone's attention. Some habits die hard, even after a decade of being out. Alex paused his packing, watching Nathan's subtle gesture. He'd seen this ritual before, the way Nathan transformed himself before visiting Ohio, becoming smaller, quieter, more careful. It broke Alex's heart every time. The phone call had come at 6 in the morning. Nathan's grandmother, Evelyn Walsh, had passed away in her sleep at 84. The funeral was set for today, and somehow, Nathan was expected to drive the 4 hours to Riverside, Ohio, where he hadn't set foot since his 18th birthday. Alex closed his suitcase with a soft click. His flight to Portland for a client consultation wasn't until noon, but he could cancel it. He'd done it before when Nathan needed him, and he'd do it again without question. That's what you do for the person you love, even when they insist on protecting you from their own pain. Nathan caught his reflection again, this time noticing the way his shoulders curved inward, already bracing for impact. Alex appeared behind him in the mirror, hands settling gently on those tense shoulders. The weight of their shared silence spoke volumes. 3 years together, and Alex had never met Nathan's family. Not because Nathan was ashamed of him, but because Nathan refused to subject the man he loved to the kind of cruelty he'd experienced growing up. It was a protection that felt more like punishment sometimes, for both of them. Their small apartment told a different story than the one Nathan would live today. Rainbow pride flags tucked discreetly behind books. Photos of them at last summer's Pride Parade displayed proudly on the mantle. Alex's medical bills from his recent surgery stacked neatly on their shared desk next to the envelope marked House Fund, where they'd been saving dollar by dollar for something that felt increasingly impossible on their teacher and nonprofit salaries. The student loan statements were another reminder of reality. $45,000 that followed Nathan everywhere. A monthly payment that meant choosing between groceries and hope. Alex's nonprofit salary barely covered his medications, let alone the down payment they'd need for their own place. Some months, love felt like the only currency they could afford. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from his cousin Derek. "Sorry for your loss. I know you two were close." Even Derek didn't dare mention that Nathan might want to bring someone for support. The word roommate had become family code for the relationship everyone knew existed, but no one acknowledged. Evelyn Walsh had been the only constant in Nathan's life after his family exploded that November night in 2005. She never asked about his personal life directly, but over the years, she'd made small comments that suggested she noticed things. When Nathan seemed happier during visits, when he'd smile while reading text messages, when he'd mention weekend plans without details. Last Christmas, she'd said something that stuck with him. "You seem lighter these past few years. Nathan, good for you." It wasn't acceptance exactly, but it wasn't rejection either. In a family that dealt in absolutes, Evelyn had always existed in the spaces between words. The brass keys she'd given him that night at the bus station still lived in his wallet, worn smooth by years of nervous handling. "Wait until they show you who they are," she'd whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "Then open it." He'd never understood what she meant, but he'd never thrown it away either. Now she was gone, and that key felt heavier than ever. Alex's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. The offer to cancel the Portland trip hung in the air between them. Unspoken but understood, Nathan turned from the mirror, seeing his own fear reflected in Alex's dark eyes. They both knew this wasn't just about a funeral. This was about Nathan walking back into a world that had spent 10 years pretending he didn't exist. The morning stretched ahead like a challenge neither of them had asked for, but both knew they had to face. If you've ever had to choose between being yourself and being accepted, If you've ever hidden the person you love to protect them from your own family's rejection, this story is for you. Stay with us, because what Nathan discovers at his grandmother's funeral will change everything he thought he knew about love, family, and the courage it takes to live authentically. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of finding family in unexpected places, on the quiet power of choosing love over fear. The Riverside funeral home smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and wilted chrysanthemums. Nothing like the lavender and cedar scent that had always surrounded Evelyn Walsh in life. Nathan sat alone in the front row, the weight of his phone heavy in his pocket, as silent messages from Alex provided the only warmth in the sterile room. Behind him, the wooden pews stretched empty except for scattered family members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Uncle Robert studied his shoes with the intensity of someone avoiding eye contact. Aunt Margaret scrolled through her phone, pausing occasionally to show concern she didn't feel. Cousin Derek sat with his wife, their two young children fidgeting in clothes too formal for their understanding of death. The lavender bundle Nathan had brought lay alone on Evelyn's simple pine casket. He'd driven 20 minutes out of his way to find the exact variety she'd helped him plant when he was 7, back when his biggest worry was whether the flowers would survive the Ohio winter. The purple stems looked fragile against the polished wood, the only splash of color in a room designed to contain grief rather than celebrate life. Nathan's phone buzzed often. Alex had sent a photo of their apartment's small balcony garden, where the lavender they'd grown together bloomed in ceramic pots. "Thinking of you," the message read. "Lavender means remembrance. Perfect choice. Love you." The simple words steadied Nathan's breathing. Even 400 miles away, Alex understood what this moment meant in ways his blood family never could. Nathan typed back quickly, "Miss you. Can't wait to come home." Aunt Margaret glanced over, her eyes catching the movement of his thumbs across the screen. "Still living with that roommate?" she asked, the words wrapped in air quotes that made Nathan's skin crawl. The question carried decades of willful ignorance, a family's collective decision to acknowledge Nathan's existence while erasing the most important part of his life. Before Nathan could respond, Cousin Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Something had changed in Derek over the years, a softness around the edges that hadn't been there in their youth. He cleared his throat quietly. "Some things are private, Mom." The gentle correction hung in the air like a prayer. It wasn't a defense exactly, but it wasn't silence either. In a family that specialized in loud judgment and quiet cruelty, even Derek's mild pushback felt revolutionary. Uncle Robert snorted softly, a sound that dismissed both his son's comment and Nathan's entire existence. "Privacy," he muttered, the word dripping with disdain. "Some things shouldn't need to be private if they were natural." Nathan's jaw tightened, but before the familiar shame could settle in his chest, his phone buzzed again. Alex had sent a heart emoji followed by a photo of the two of them from last weekend, smiling over coffee in their sunny kitchen. The image reminded Nathan of something essential: love didn't require anyone's permission to be real. Mr. Peterson, the funeral director, appeared at the front of the room with the nervous energy of a man facing an impossible task. For 20 minutes, he'd been asking family members to share memories of Evelyn Walsh. For 20 minutes, he'd been met with the kind of silence usually reserved for war crimes and tax audits. Surely someone would like to speak about Mrs. Walsh. Mr. Peterson tried again, his voice carrying a note of desperation that would have been funny in different circumstances. "A favorite memory, perhaps a lesson she taught you." The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Elderly neighbors shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves about the family that couldn't find a single kind word for their departed matriarch. Nathan watched his relatives sink deeper into their chairs, as if the pews might swallow them whole and spare them this public display of their own emotional poverty. Nathan felt the brass key in his wallet, warm against his leg through the fabric of his pants. Evelyn's words echoed in his memory, "Wait until they show you who they are." This was it, he realized. This moment of collective abandonment, this refusal to honor even the complicated love between a grandmother and her family. They were showing him exactly who they were. His phone buzzed one more time. Alex had sent a simple message. "You're stronger than you know. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." Nathan stood up. The sound of his movement cut through the funeral home's oppressive quiet like a bell. Every head turned toward him, surprise registering on faces that had spent years avoiding his gaze. Uncle Robert's eyebrows shot up. Aunt Margaret actually looked up from her phone. Derek's expression shifted to something that might have been respect, or possibly concern that Nathan was having some kind of breakdown. "I'll speak," Nathan said, his voice carrying clearly through the small room. The words felt foreign on his tongue, not because he was nervous, but because he was about to do something none of them expected: tell the truth about love in a room full of people who'd spent their lives running from it. As Nathan walked toward the podium, he thought about Alex waiting for his text in Portland, about the future they were building one difficult conversation at a time, about the grandmother who'd given him a key to something he was only beginning to understand. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is speak honestly about love in a room full of people determined to pretend it doesn't exist. The lesson Evelyn had been teaching him for years suddenly became clear. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love even when the people around you choose differently. The mahogany-paneled office of Hartwell and Associates felt like stepping into a different century, where leather-bound books held more weight than digital screens, and every surface spoke of old money and older secrets. Nathan sat across from Richard Hartwell, a silver-haired man whose calm demeanor suggested he'd delivered life-changing news so many times it had become routine. "Your grandmother has left you her entire estate," Hartwell said, sliding a folder across the polished desk. "The house on Elm Street, her investment portfolio, savings accounts, and several holdings in nonprofit organizations. The total value is approximately $2.1 million. Nathan's world tilted sideways. The numbers felt abstract, impossible, like someone reading him lottery results for a ticket he'd never bought. He thought of the envelope marked House Fund sitting on his kitchen table, containing $800 they'd saved over 2 years. He thought of Alex's medical bills, his student loans, the careful calculations they made every month about whether they could afford both groceries and hope. His phone rang immediately after he stumbled out of Hartwell's office. Alex's voice came through clear and concerned from Portland. "How are you holding up, babe?" "Alex, you're not going to believe this." Nathan's voice cracked as he explained the inheritance, the impossible numbers that could change everything about their careful, constrained life. For the first time in hours, he heard Alex laugh, a sound of pure joy that made Nathan realize how long it had been since either of them had felt truly free. But freedom, Nathan was about to learn, comes with a price. Uncle Robert's call came that evening, his voice carrying the forced casualness of someone trying to hide their desperation. "Hey, Nathan, I know you're in town. We should talk. Your dad and I have been thinking we could do something with that land now, you know?" The words felt rehearsed, like Uncle Robert had been practicing them since the moment he had heard about the will. The messages that followed revealed the true character Evelyn had spent 20 years documenting. First, Aunt Margaret, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Nathan, honey, I'm sure there's been some mistake. That money should be divided among all of us." Then his father, stern as always but with an edge of fear. "I'm still your father, Nathan. Family means something, even if you've forgotten." But it was Uncle Robert's final message that stripped away any pretense of family love. That money belongs to real family, not some deviant lifestyle choice. "We're going to contest this will, and when we do, everyone's going to know exactly what you are." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fire Nathan had been trying to outrun for years. His teaching position in conservative Riverside suddenly felt precarious. The life he and Alex had built in Chicago, carefully constructed to avoid exactly this kind of exposure, seemed fragile as glass. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text from Derek that cut through his spiraling anxiety. "I'm sorry for what my dad said. Not all of us feel that way." It was the first time in 10 years that any family member had acknowledged Nathan's sexuality without coding it in shame or denial. Alex caught the first flight back from Portland, arriving at their apartment with the fierce determination of someone ready to fight for what mattered. "We face this together," he said, setting down his suitcase and pulling Nathan into his arms. "Or we don't face it at all." But Hartwell had been expecting this exact scenario. When Nathan returned to his office the next morning with Alex by his side, the lawyer smiled with the satisfaction of someone playing chess against opponents who'd never learned the rules. "Mrs. Walsh anticipated every move your family would make," Hartwell explained, opening a thick file that contained 20 years of documentation. She recorded conversations, saved voicemails, kept detailed notes of every time family members asked her for money. She also left specific instructions about what should happen if anyone contested the will based on your sexual orientation. The folder contained audio recordings that painted a devastating picture of Nathan's family. Uncle Robert asking for $40,000 to save his failing business, Aunt Margaret pleading for college tuition for her kids, even Nathan's father requesting money for a new truck with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never been told no. But the most powerful evidence was Evelyn's own voice, recorded just months before her death. "If my family cannot accept Nathan for who he is, if they choose bigotry over love, then they deserve nothing from me. Every dollar will go to organizations that help young people like Nathan find the acceptance their own families deny them." Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Your grandmother forced them into an impossible choice. Nathan, they can accept you completely and share in her legacy. Or they can contest the will based on who you love and lose everything to LGBTQ organizations across Ohio." Nathan felt the weight of Evelyn's final lessons settling around him like a blanket. She hadn't just left him money. She'd created a test that would reveal whether his family was capable of growth or doomed to repeat the same cycles of hatred that had shaped their lives for generations. The brass key in his wallet suddenly made perfect sense. This was what Evelyn had been preparing him for. The moment when he would have to choose between hiding in safety and standing in his truth. The inheritance wasn't just about financial security, it was about having the resources to live authentically, regardless of who approved. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't what someone gives you, but how they teach you to value yourself when the world insists you're worthless. 6 months later, Nathan stood in Evelyn's bedroom, surrounded by the accumulated silence of a life lived in careful isolation. The house that now belonged to him felt like a museum of secrets, each room holding pieces of a woman he was only beginning to understand. Alex moved quietly through the space beside him, helping sort through decades of possessions with the patient tenderness of someone who understood that grief takes many forms. The bedroom closet stretched deeper than Nathan remembered, filled with formal dresses Evelyn had worn to church socials and family gatherings, where she'd played the role of stern matriarch with Oscar-worthy precision. Behind a row of navy suits and sensible shoes, Alex's fingers brushed against something unexpected, a leather-bound scrapbook hidden beneath a stack of old quilts. Nathan opened the cover with trembling hands, and his breath caught in his throat. The first page contained his elementary school report cards, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. Not just any report cards, but ones he'd never known she'd received. 4th grade, when he'd written an essay about wanting to be a teacher. 6th grade, when he'd won the school's kindness award for helping younger students with their reading. Page after page revealed a secret documentation of his life that spanned decades. A newspaper clipping about his college graduation, summa cum laude in English literature. An article from the Riverside Gazette about his teaching award, the one where he'd been recognized for creating an LGBTQ support group at his high school. Photos he'd never known existed, carefully cut from family gathering pictures and arranged with the devotion of a proud grandmother. But it was the captions that broke Nathan's heart, written in Evelyn's careful script. They told a story of love observed from a distance. Nathan at Christmas, age 12, already so compassionate. Nathan's first teaching job, he'll change the world. My brave grandson, helping kids who feel different. Alex leaned closer, his shoulder warm against Nathan's as they turned to the final section of the scrapbook. The pages here were older, The photographs faded to sepia tones that spoke of a different era entirely. Two young women stood together in what appeared to be a garden, their hands almost touching, their smiles intimate in a way that had nothing to do with friendship. One of the women was unmistakably Evelyn, decades younger but with the same determined set to her jaw. The other was a stranger with kind eyes and dark hair pinned in the style of the 1960s. In every photo, they stood just close enough to suggest a story that society would never have allowed them to tell. Nathan's hand shook as he opened the letter tucked between the final pages, written in Evelyn's handwriting, but with an honesty she'd never shown in life. "My dearest Nathan," it began. "If you are reading this, then you've discovered what I spent 80 years hiding from the world and from myself." The letter continued with a confession that reframed everything Nathan thought he knew about his grandmother. "I loved a woman named Rose for 40 years. We lived as spinster roommates because the world would never have understood what we were to each other. Rose died believing I was ashamed of her, and that shame has poisoned every relationship I've had since." Nathan's vision blurred as he read Evelyn's explanation for the cruelty that had defined his childhood. "I became hard because I hated myself for not having your courage. When you came out at 18, I saw the bravery I'd never possessed, and it terrified me. I should have defended you that night, but I was too much of a coward to protect what I couldn't claim for myself." The letter's final paragraphs revealed the true purpose behind the inheritance and the elaborate tests Evelyn had constructed. "The money isn't guilt offering, Nathan. It's recognition of the strength I never found. You chose authenticity over acceptance, love over safety. You became the person I was too afraid to be." Alex's hand found Nathan's, their fingers intertwining as they absorbed the magnitude of what they discovered. Evelyn hadn't just left Nathan an inheritance. She'd left him the truth about who she really was, and why she'd spent a lifetime pushing away the people who reminded her of her own hidden desires. A final video message waited on an old laptop hidden beneath Rose's letters. Evelyn sat in her familiar rocking chair, looking directly into the camera with an expression Nathan had never seen in life: peaceful, authentic, free. "Live the life I was too afraid to live," she said simply. "Love Alex the way I should have loved Rose. Don't let fear steal your joy the way it stole mine." Nathan understood now why Evelyn had been watching him so carefully during those Sunday visits, why she'd noticed his happiness in recent years, why she'd smiled when she caught him texting someone who clearly brought him joy. She'd been living vicariously through his courage, finding pieces of her own lost authenticity in his willingness to be himself despite the cost. The brass key finally made perfect sense. It hadn't been a literal key to unlock something physical. It had been a metaphor for the courage required to unlock the truth about yourself, even when that truth contradicts everything your family expects you to be. As Nathan and Alex sat together, surrounded by the evidence of two love stories, one hidden and one celebrated, Nathan realized that sometimes the most powerful inheritance isn't money or property, but the permission to live authentically that comes from understanding you're not alone in your struggle. The greatest gift one generation can give the next isn't the elimination of obstacles, but the courage to face them with integrity intact. The courtroom in downtown Riverside felt like a stage where decades of family dysfunction would finally be performed for an audience of strangers. Nathan sat between Alex and his attorney, watching Uncle Robert's lawyer present a case built on barely concealed homophobia disguised as concern for family values. The legal challenge had made local headlines: "Family fights gay grandson over inheritance," turning Nathan's most private pain into public spectacle. But something unexpected happened as the case unfolded. Letters poured into the courthouse from Nathan's former students, current colleagues, and parents whose children had found safety in his classroom support groups. The conservative Ohio town that Nathan had feared would reject him instead rallied around the teacher who'd spent years helping kids navigate their own struggles with identity and acceptance. Principal Martinez testified about Nathan's character, describing an educator who stayed after school to counsel struggling students and who'd never once brought his personal life into the classroom inappropriately. Former students, now adults, spoke about how Nathan's quiet support had literally saved their lives during their darkest moments of self-doubt. Derek took the witness stand with visible nervousness, his voice shaking as he addressed his father directly. "Dad, I've been questioning my own sexuality for years. Nathan never tried to influence me or anyone else. He just showed us it was possible to be honest about who you are and still be a good person." The courtroom fell silent as Derek's confession hung in the air. Uncle Robert's face went ashen, his carefully constructed case crumbling as his own son dismantled the foundation of hatred it was built upon. In that moment, Nathan saw the cycle of secrecy and shame that had poisoned his family for generations as finally beginning to break. When Hartwell played Evelyn's recorded videos in court, the devastating portrait of a family motivated by greed rather than love became undeniable. Uncle Robert's desperate phone calls asking for money, Aunt Margaret's manipulative tears about her children's future, even Nathan's father demanding support for business ventures that had nothing to do with family loyalty. The judge's ruling was swift and unambiguous. The will stood as written, and any further challenges based on Nathan's sexual orientation would result in the entire estate being donated to LGBTQ organizations, as Evelyn had specified. Uncle Robert left the courthouse without looking back, but Aunt Margaret lingered in the hallway, her expression a mixture of shame and something that might have been respect. "I should have defended you years ago," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the courthouse bustle. "I was scared of your father, scared of what people would think. I'm sorry. Nathan, you deserve better from all of us." Within a year, Evelyn's house opened its doors in the renovated barn behind the family property Nathan had inherited. The LGBTQ youth shelter operated on a simple principle that Evelyn herself had never learned to practice unconditional love. Nathan and Alex lived in the main house, but their real life happened in the converted space where young people who'd been rejected by their own families found temporary refuge and permanent hope. Derek became a regular volunteer, working through his own identity questions while helping newer residents navigate theirs. His marriage had ended when he finally found the courage to live authentically, but the divorce had been amicable, rooted in honesty rather than betrayal. His ex-wife brought their children to volunteer at the shelter, teaching them early that love comes in many forms and all of them are valid. Aunt Margaret surprised everyone by becoming the shelter's most effective fundraiser, using her connections in the church community to bridge divides that had seemed impossible to cross. She'd found her own courage, decades late, but not too late to matter. The wedding took place in the shelter's garden on a perfect September afternoon, surrounded by lavender plants that Alex and Nathan had nurtured from seeds. Derek stood as Nathan's best man, while Aunt Margaret read scripture about love that made no distinctions between different kinds of hearts. Uncle Robert's absence spoke louder than any words could, but the presence of chosen family filled the space his bitterness had abandoned. Wedding favors were small packets of lavender seeds with cards reading, "Love grows in unexpected places." An empty chair reserved for Evelyn held her photograph draped with a rainbow flag, a symbol she'd never been brave enough to claim in life, but one that honored the woman she'd finally become in death. Nathan's vows referenced the grandmother who'd taught him that family isn't about blood relations, but about who shows up for you when life gets difficult. Alex spoke about finding love in a world that often felt hostile and how Nathan had taught him that courage is contagious. As autumn settled over Ohio, Nathan and Alex walked to the small cemetery where two headstones now stood side by side. Nathan had located Rose's grave in the same cemetery, moved her remains to rest beside Evelyn's with the blessing of Rose's surviving niece, who'd always wondered about her aunt's devoted roommate. Fresh lavender lay on both graves, and Alex's rainbow keychain caught the sunlight as he placed it gently beside the flowers. "Thank you for loving her, even in secret," Alex whispered to Rose's headstone. "And thank you," he said to Evelyn's, "for teaching him that love is worth fighting for." The lesson Evelyn had spent her lifetime learning and Nathan had spent his inheritance sharing was finally complete. Authentic love creates ripples that extend far beyond the people brave enough to claim it first. When one person chooses truth over safety, they give others permission to do the same. Every day at Evelyn's house, young people arrived carrying suitcases and broken hearts, but they left with something invaluable: the knowledge that they deserved love exactly as they were. Nathan had inherited more than money from his grandmother. He'd inherited the opportunity to break generational cycles of shame and replace them with radical acceptance. Have you ever discovered that someone who seemed cruel was actually protecting their own broken heart? What would you do if you inherited not just wealth, but the chance to heal wounds that span generations? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales of love triumphing over fear. One brave choice at a time.